Okay, alright, now we're going to show how we can calibrate a gauge reader to a gauge. Here we have a demo set up where we have two gauges that are identical and they're side by side, and I have a little hand pump here that you can see, both gauges move. So I'm going to calibrate the gauge reader on the right hand side. So we're going to put this one over this one and read the gauge here while you can see the other one, you can see the actual pressure. Okay, so let me show you what we need first to mount the gauge, and then what do we do to calibrate it. So essentially, if you have a gauge like this, what we'll do is we'll pick an adapter. You see this adapter size here, it fits the size of the gauge like that, and we have a little hose clamp. So what we want to do is put this one over the gauge and tighten the hose clamp. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the markings on this one here, there's a little sign here that shows the tilt. That means the tilt angle of the WGR that locks it in place. It's a little quick disconnect like that. So this part should be facing up, okay? And then we would mount this on a gauge like that, okay? And then we would tighten the hose clamp. Hopefully I have this really straight here. Okay. Tighten the hose clamp then. And this adapter is on pretty tight, okay? And then what I can do is snap this piece on. And then if I want, I can take it off and I can see the gauge underneath. And if I snap it on, it could read it below. Okay, now that's how you mount the gauge. Let's talk a little bit about how you calibrate it. Now, if you come a little bit closer here, let's look at this gauge here. This one, what you want to do is to focus on the needle, but try to avoid any of the markings, right? So the screws here, the label here, and all the markings around. Essentially, the unit, the gauge reader, has a camera, right? If you look at the gauge unit here, there's a camera, and when I press the button, it takes a picture. The little flashes is like having a flash, and it takes a picture, and it tries to find the needle. Now, if there's a lot of writing around it, it's going to get more confusing. What is the needle? What is the writing? So what we try to do is pick places, a gauge where there's a nice part where there's not writing and you can see the needle without writing around it. So that's the philosophy, okay? This one is pretty clean, but I'll show you how we can do other ones that have other markings. Essentially, because our light is red here, any markings in red become invisible and under red light. So you're really only concerned about the black writing, okay? So now what I'll do is that I will clip this on, and we will start a calibration procedure. Now, how do we calibrate? We actually need this calibration tool. This one actually, it's a little board here. We have a unit, when you use it, this will be in a plastic box and it'll attach to a tablet, okay? Unfortunately, I left that one over at Calvert Cliffs. We're in the office right now. This is the unit that I have, but you can imagine this is in a box. And then I'm going to use my laptop to calibrate, but again, if at Calvert Cliffs we will have a little tablet. This will be a box that's stuck to the tablet. You can hold it with one hand and you can do the calibration with that tablet tool. But the process is pretty much the same, okay? So I take this here. I have a regular, like a USB cable. USB cable plugs into this into this dongle right here. Okay, and then the dongle plugs into one of my USB ports on my computer, and I put the programmer close to the gauge reader like that. Okay, now on my computer or my laptop, I'm going to start up the configuration tool. So here's the WGR configuration tool. Okay, and now I want to make the tool talk with the gauge reader up here. So first, what I'll do is put the gauge reader into configuration mode. Now if you come a bit closer, I'm going to take this label off here. Okay. Now there's a sequence to put in a configuration. I'll go to config, I press the middle button, it'll ask me for a password. Obviously I don't want anybody to configure this thing. I'll go with middle, right, left, middle. That's the code to unlock it here. Then it's in config mode. Now what I'll do is that I'll come to my program and I'll say find, and it says it found it, right? Now here's the device. You can notice the last 4 digits, 0F0EB. That's the same as the one here. You see that it found this one. If it found multiple ones, then you'll see different devices, and you can select the one that you want to connect to. So this one, I'm going to select this. This device is the only one. I say bind. Okay, and now I'm talking with that device, and when I say next, I have little screens that come up that let me do the configuration. Okay, now one thing that you should keep in mind is that this programmer device should be probably within about half a foot or so of the gauge reader. So here I have a little ledge to put it on. We're going to make a little hanger thing so you could put it by the gauge. Basically the antenna here is pretty close to the gauge, and it could talk pretty well. That's only for the configuration, right? You want to walk up to the gauge for the configuration. Now I'm going to start here with a setup. I'm going to go through each of these tabs, and then this is how we calibrate it. Okay, so first of all, this unit here, it's PSI. I want to sample at 300 seconds, so that's 5 minutes. And then the gauge goes from 0 to 100 PSI. So if you come up and take a look at this, it's 0 to 100 PSI, right? So I enter all of these. Now for these other ones, this is how I teach the camera how to read. Zoom enabled, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to see the needle a bit clearer. All of these options may be different for different gauges, but I'm going to show you how to do it one time. It's pretty typical, and for different gauges you might use a slightly different combination. For this one, I use a long tail needle. So this is a key thing, a long tail or a short tail. Now if you look at this needle here, it's the tail's pretty long. Some of the needles have almost no tail, so then you only see the head of the needle, and the tail you don't see at all. Well, this one actually we're going to see pretty much most of the tail. If you go beyond the tail, you start getting into the marking, so you don't want to do that. So this is going to be considered a long tail needle. Okay, so we'll select long tail needle. We'll forget about this. This is the ID of the gauge, node ID, group ID. This is how we set the number of the gauge. So each of the gauge readers, WGRs, will have a unique combination of these numbers. So this will be pre-assigned depending on which level it's on. Is it on the 12-foot level, the 45-foot level? Is it on the east or west side? So we'll enter these numbers. So this one, it's already pre-programmed there. So then I say, okay, well, I'm going to send these. I'm happy with this right now. I'm going to send that to the gauge reader. So sending means I'm going to transmit the data, and it's going to be loaded in the gauge reader. Now I'm going to calibrate this. Now minimum gauge angle, maximum gauge angle, it's typically 45 and 315. You probably don't have to mess with these ones here. Those, almost all the gauges are the same. So if you look at it here, the angle here is 0, the min angle is 45, and the max angle is 315. So you kind of think about 45 degrees, 315. So 0 is at 45. 315 is at 100. Again, almost all the gauges have this, right? So you don't have to touch this part. I'm going to go on to the next part here, which let's see, camera exposure, tip, tail. So this one you don't have to really mess with it either. This next one is at advanced tab. It's pretty much standard all the time. Then I go to image. Now this is where I really do the calibration. Okay, I'm going to ask the unit to take a picture now. It's starting to receive an image. So if you come closer, you'll see that it's taking a picture. Now it's not super fast. It takes about like 15-20 seconds to actually capture the image for this case. Okay. Now once it's calibrated, you can take a picture like every 2 seconds. But in this one here, it scans the picture and it lets us calibrate it. Okay, this is only one time that we have to do this. All right, it's you'll see that it's pretty small, but when it finishes, it'll expand it so you can see it clearly. All right, now that we've captured the image, you see that the needle is zoomed in pretty far, right? So I can see really the area that I'm interested in. Then it says, I click the center point. So I'm gonna click the middle of the needle, okay? And then it says pick different radius rings. Now I'll explain what this means, but basically it asked me to pick 5 rings, and I'm going to do that right now. Okay, now these rings that I pick, basically it's going to ask the camera to take a picture, and then the computer's going to search along the ring here to try to find the needle. So it says white, white, white. Oops, I see black. That's a needle, and it's white, 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 and then I see black, and there's a needle. So I'm going to find a needle by going around the ring and finding out where. And if I look at each ring, I'm going to find a series of dots where I find the needle. Then it can figure out what the slope of the needle is, and then it can tell you what is the PSI by looking at the slope. Okay, so now I select all the rings here, and I'm going to go and say, okay, well, I'm pretty happy with the rings, and I'm going to go to config. Basically here in config mode, all the checkboxes you should have. I don't need to explain that. Okay, then you say sample, and right now it's going to try to find the needle, as I mentioned earlier. Now you see, it found the needle with all the green parts there. So each ring that it went around, it found the needle, and the white part, it didn't find anything. So this is really clean. And you see all the red dots here. You can see clearly. The red dots is sort of the line. It's the middle part, the green that it found. And by looking at that, it thinks it's 6 PSI. So let's look at the gauge right now. See if it really is around 6 PSI. Yeah, that's about right, right? This is 0, this is 10, this is 20. This is about 6 PSI. Now, if it's not right, sometimes it's tilted at an angle, I can go correct that. Now, it seems like this one is roughly right. Now I'm going to pump up the gauge a little bit, okay? And now I'm going to try to take another reading. Now, before I go do that, I'm going to go back to here, set up. I'm going to send the parameters, right? I'm going to send the parameters. Any one of these tabs, you say send, it sends it over. Now, what it did when I did that, when I selected the rings, is that it actually populated this tab here. It says calibration. It's populated the center X point, so it's like 67 pixels from the top. Center X is 67 from the left. Center Y point is 68 pixels from the top. And then each of the radius is how many pixels from the middle. So 19, 23, 27, 30, 36. So if you go back to this, right, this is like 67 pixels, 68 pixels, and then 19, 23, 27. So that's how this picture converted to filling in this, right? So I can fill this in by hand as well, but it was easier in a picture. And I say send, and now the gauge remembers all of that data, okay? So now I'm going to come over here. Now I just changed the gauge. I pumped it up a little bit. So now it's instead of the needle being at about 6 PSI, it's somewhere around like 30, maybe 38, 37 PSI. All right. So I'm going to ask it to take another picture. So I'm going to start to image. It takes another, just a few, less than a minute. Now, if you're installing this out in the field, of course, you're not going to have the option to pump up the gauge and have it move. But essentially, I'm doing this so that you could see, how it detects the new samples. But you really don't need to do that. I mean, if you select the middle of the needle and you select the rings like I have here, and there's nothing confusing the needle with the background, then it's fine. You just calibrate it one time. But just to be sure, I showed you now it's it's around like 37, 38, and I'm going to ask for a sample again. And you see now it found the needle up here, and you see the red dots here, and it's like about 36.07, right? So I said it's probably around like 37. If you look at the gauge, I think it said 36. So probably I'm a little bit rotated, right? And so what I can do here is that I can go back here and say gauge tilt angle, and it's thinking it's a little bit too small, so it's like -1. I'm going to try that. Okay, and go back to the image and say sample, and then I should be, yeah, now it's like 36.37, so it might be like -2. So you see what, you know, the velocity is. My gauge, if it's not mounted exactly straight, then, you know, it's going to read a little bit off. So that's probably pretty close, right? It's about 37, right? 36.82. So I'm pretty happy with this right now. I go back to home and I say finish, and now the device goes off of calibration mode. It's now configured and it's ready to go. Okay. Again, normally this process so it goes faster, but I wanted to explain all the different steps. All right, thank you. If you have any questions, please email us or give me a call, and I can answer your questions. Okay, thank you. Take care.